that have leaves that are pretty much horizontally oriented. So we'll review this quickly again, and then we'll take a look at the ones that have vertically oriented leaves. So what was the point of having cuticle on both sides of the leaf?
More air.
Protection against what? Okay? Yes, sir. All right, so the waxy cuticle is basically there to waterproof you, which means that if you can't exchange water vapor with the outside, you're going to have a hard time getting CO2 to go inside as well. And that's what brings us to the stomata, singular stoma, plural stomata. And what are stomata? Yes, sir? So they're the holes in the epidermis, and they are surrounded by specifically guard cells. And what do the guard cells do? They regulate the opening and closing of the pores. So the guard cells swell, they open, they shrink, they close, so they regulate the opening and closing of the stomata. And why do we have these mesophyll cells? What's the function of the mesophyll cells in the leaf? Yes, sir. They're the main photosynthetic cells, that's where all the chloroplasts are. Dark cells have chloroplasts also, but the majority of the photosynthesis happens in the mesophyll of the leaves. And what's the difference between the spongy and the palisade? Yes, sir. All right, so palisade have more chloroplasts in them, spongy have fewer chloroplasts in them. Any other differences between the two? Yes, sir. Flasher. So lots of air spaces in the spongy mesophyll, much tighter air spaces in the palisade. The palisade are more tightly packed. There are still air spaces in here, but they're a lot smaller. So when you look at the horizontally oriented leaf, you notice that there are no stomata at the top. And we reviewed this the last time. So which direction is the light coming? From the top. So which side of the leaf is warmer? The top. The highest intensity light is at the top. So the highest rate of photosynthesis. At the top, you have the highest intensity light, and you have the most number of chloroplasts packed towards the top. The highest demand for CO2 is up here, but the stomata are down here, which help for two reasons. So in terms of water vapor, why would it be good to put the stomata on the bottom side of the leaf? Yes, sir. All right, lower rates of evaporation, then you have them in the shaded, cooler side. And in terms of CO2 concentration, why would it be better to have them on that side? Yes, sir. All right, so diffusion of CO2 from the outside to the inside, down the gradient. The highest demand is up here. And so you get a nice gradient throughout the leaf, so you get a nice diffusion of CO2 from the highest concentration outside the leaf through the stomata, through the spongy mesophyll. Well, you have some demand for CO2, but less than the palisade, and eventually to the palisade where you have the highest demand for CO2. If you were to put the stomata at the top, you would have a couple problems. What would be the biggest problem? Yes, sir. All right, so the gain of CO2 versus the amount of water you're going to lose is going to be worse for the plants. They're going to lose way too much water if you put them on the sunny, warmer side of the leaf. And in terms of CO2 diffusion, you don't have that many air spaces between the palisade, so it's going to be tougher for the CO2 to diffuse from the top to the bottom, as opposed to going from the bottom to the top, because you have less resistance to flow when you have all these air spaces. Plus, there's the gradient. The gradient favors the diffusion towards where the highest demand is. And if you put the stomata at the top and the highest demand is at the top, getting the CO2 through all that cramped space to the spongy mesophyll where the demand isn't that high to begin with is not going to be that efficient. So the efficiency of CO2 diffusion as well as water conservation goes up if you have the stomata on the shaded side. So we reviewed all of this the last time, but now I want you to consider this and look at a leaf from a different plant. So here we have a grass leaf, and grass leaves are not horizontally oriented. And I realize grass is at a premium in New York City, especially this time of year, but those of you who have ever mowed grass in your life, you know that grass plates stick up. They don't grow like this, they grow like that. So these are pretty much vertically oriented, as opposed to horizontally oriented. So when you look at a cross-section of the grass leaf here, you see the arrangement of the cells is very different. So let me walk you through this. You still have your epidermis on both sides of the leaf, and the epidermis is covered with a cuticle. Notice that you have mesophyll cells and you have your vascular bundles. The vascular bundles are for transport of water from the roots up and for the sugars to the rest of the plant. But you don't see the arrangement of the cells like you see in the horizontal leaf. You don't have palisade versus spongy. You don't have that kind of distinction here. And notice there are stomata on both sides. You don't have stomata on one side only. So I'm going to ask you to think about that for a couple of minutes. Talk amongst yourselves. And then we'll see why it makes sense for these leaves to have stomata on both sides and to not distinguish between palisade and spongy. So don't specialize into palisade and spongy as opposed to a horizontal leaf.